Good day, everyone. I am Andre Marie M. Ampara from BS Ed English Block B, presenting the poetry analysis of the poem Ode to the West Wind by Percy B. Shelley. The objectives of this video are to introduce the poet biography, to analyze the poem, and to analyze the meaning of the poem by stanza. To begin this video, let's talk about the poet. Percy B. Shelley was born on August 4, 1792 in Horsham, Sussex, England. The eldest son of Timothy and Elizabeth Shelley, he stood in the line to inherit his grandfather's considerable estate and a seat in Parliament. He attended in Eton College where he began writing poetry and went on to Oxford University. His first publication was a Gothic novel, Zastrozzi, in 1810. He is an English romantic poet whose passionate search for personal love and social justice was gradually channeled from overt action into poem that rank with the greatest in English language. Now, let me recite you his writing poem Ode to the West Wind. O wild west wind, thou breath of autumn beings, thou from whose unseen presence of leaves are driven like ghosts from an enchanter playing. Yellow and black and pale and hectic red, pestilence-stricken multitude, O thou who chariotest to their dark winter bed, the winged seed where they lie, cold and low, each like a corpse within its graves, until thine azure sister of the spring shall blow her clarion o'er the dreaming the earth and fill driving sweet buds like plucks to feed in air, with living hues and odors, plain and hill. While the spirit, which are moving everywhere, destroyer and preserver, hear, O hear, thou on whose stream, mid the stiff sky's commotion, loose clouds like earth's decaying leaves are shed, shook from the tangled above of heaven and oceans. Angels of rain and lightning, there spread on the blue surface of thine airy surge, like the bright hair uplifted from the head of some pure Maenad, even from the dim verge of the horizon to the zenith height, the locks of the approaching storms, O dirge of decaying year to which this closing night will be doom of a vast sepulture, bolted with all thy congregated might of vapors from whose solid atmosphere black rain and fire and hail will burst, O hear! Thou who didst waken from his summer dreams the blue Mediterranean where he lay lulled by the cold of his crystalline streams, beside a pumice isle in Bass Bay, and saw in sleep old palaces and towers, quivering within the waves' intenser day, all overgrown with azure moss and flowers, so sweet, the sense paints picturing them, thou for whose path the Atlantic's level powers cleave themselves into chasm, while far below the sea blooms and owes the woods which wear the sapless foliage of the ocean know thy voice, and suddenly grow grey with fear, and tremble and spoil themselves, O hear! If I were a dead leaf thou mightest bear, if I were a swift cloud supply with thee, a wave to fan beneath thy power and share the impulse of thy strength, only less free than thou, O uncontrollable, if even I were as in my boyhood, and could be the comrade of thy wandering over heavens as then, when to outstrip thy sky speed scarce seemed a vision I would ne'er have striven, as thus with thee in prayer in my sore need, O lift me as a wave, a leaf, a clouds, I fall upon the thorns of life, I bleed. A heavy weight of hours has chained and bowed one to like thee, tameless and swift and proud. Make me thy lyre even as the forest is. What ifs my lips are falling like its own? The tumult of thy mighty harmonies will take from the boat a deep autumnal tone. Sweet thoughts in sadness, be thou, spirit fierce, my spirit, be thou me, impetuous one. drive my dead thoughts over the universe, like with her lips to quicken a new birth, and by the incantation of this verse, scatter from an unextinguished heart ashes and spark, my word among mankind be through my lips to awaken earth. The trumpet of prophecy, O wind, if winter comes, can spring be far behind. Now, let's talk about the poem. Ode to the West Wind is a lyric poem that addresses the west wind as a powerful force and as it scatters the poet words throughout the world. Ode to the West Wind was written in Cascine Wood outside Florence, Italy, and published in 1820. It focuses on the death, necessary destruction, and the possibilities of rebirth. Now, let's proceed to the type of poem. Ode to the West Wind is obviously an ode poem, but the question is, what is an ode? An ode is a short lyric poem that praises an individual, an idea, or an event. The word ode comes from the Greek word aid, which means to sing or to chant. Odes are often ceremonial and informal tone. There are several types of odes, but they are all highly structured to adhere to poetic forms. It is originating in ancient Greece. Ode poems were originally performed publicly to celebrate the athlete victories. Today, the term odes is used to describe any outpouring phrase, and modern ode poems have evolved to include various types and forms. For the structure and forms, Ode to the West Wind is sonnets in terza rima. Terza rima is an Italian stanza form popularized by Alighieri after the publication of his Divine Comedy. The word terza rima means third rhyme in Italian. The pattern is A, B, A, B, C, B, D, E, D. It is also known as an interlocking rhyme scheme. It has 5 sonnets and stanza of 14 lines each. Each section has 3 tercets and a closing couplet. A tercet is a unit of 3 lines that usually contain end rhyme, while a couplet is a 2-line unit that usually contains end rhyme. Shelley wrote the tercet in a verse form called terza rima, invented by Dante. In this format, line 2 of one tercet rhymes with line 1 and 3 of the next tercet. Next is iambic pentameter. Iambic pentameter is a very common way that lines of poetry are structured. Each line has 5 sets of 2 beats. The first is unstressed, while the second is stressed. Now, let's analyze the poem. Canto 1, Stanza 1. O wild west wind, thou breath of autumn beings, thou from whose unseen presence the leaves dead are driven like ghosts from an enchanted plain. The speaker of Ode to the West Wind calls to the wild west wind in the first stanza. The capitalization of the word west and wind immediately implies that the speakers speak to the wind as if it was a person. He refers to the wind as the breath of autumn beings, further personifying it and enduing it with the human characteristic of breathing. He refers to the wind as having an unseen presence, implying that he considered the wind as the god or supernatural creature. The wind is described as a spiritual creature who drives away deaths and ghosts in the final line of this poem. Second stanza. Yellow and black and pale and hectic red, pestilence-stricken multitude, O thou who charioteest to their dark wintry bed. In this stanza, the autumn leaves is described. They are described as a symbol of death and even disease rather than a colorful and lovely. The color yellow and black and pale are described as deathly. Even the color of hectic red conjures up image of blood and disease. Pestilence struck masses, he says, of the dead and decaying leaves. This is neither a quiet nor a lovely description of autumn foliage. Rather, the speaker seems to interpret the falling leaves as a metaphor of death and illness. The wind then rides in like a chariot carrying the leaves to their gloomy cold bed, which is obviously a grave. Stanza 3. The winged seeds where they lie cold and low, each like a corpse within its graves until thine azure sister of the spring shall blow. The speaker continues the metaphor of the leaves as a dead by explaining that the wind carries them, and the winged seeds to their graves, where they lie cold and low. He then uses a simile to compare each leaf to a corpse within its graves. But then, the partway through the second line, it shifts a car. The speaker says that each is like a corpse until the wind comes through, taking away the dead but bringing new life. The use of the word azure or blue is used to describe the wind in a sharp contrast to the color that uses to describe the leaves. Stanza 4. Her clarion o'er the dreaming earth and field, driving sweet buds like flocks to feed in air, leaving hues and odors, plain and hill. With this stanza, the speaker described the wind as something which drives away death, burying the dead and bringing new life. It brings living hues and odors, which are filled with new life. Wild spirit, which art moving everywhere, destroyer and preserver, hear, O hear. In this stanza, the speaker appeals again to the wind by calling it a wild spirit and viewing it as a spiritual being who destroys and yet also preserves life. He is asking the spirit to hear his pleas or prayer. Let's proceed to the Canto 2, Stanza 1. Thou whose stream, mid the stiff sky's commotion, loose clouds like earth's decaying leaves or sheds, shook from the tangled bough of heaven and oceans. Now, the speaker addressed the wind as the person, calling it the one who will loose clouds and shakes the leaves of the bough of heaven and ocean. This reads almost as a psalm, as if the speaker is praising the wind for its power. Stanza 2. Angels of rain and lightning, there are spread on blue surface of thine airy surge, like the bright hair uplifted from the head. Here, the speaker refers to the wind as the spiritual being more powerful than angels. For the angels of rain and lightning, these are described as being spread on the blue surface of the wind. He then described these angels as being like the bright hair on the heads of an even greater being. Third stanza. Of some pierced maenad, even from the dim verge of the horizon to the zenith's height, the locks of approaching storm thou dirge. In this stanza, the speaker compares the wind to the fierce maenad, or the spiritual being that used to be found around the Greek god Dionysus. This being also described as having hair like angels. Thus, the wind is described as being like God, with angels for hair. This angel of rain and lightning revealed that a storm is on the way. Stanza 4. Of the dying years to which this closing night will be the doom of a vast sepulture, bolted with all thy congregated might. The speaker then explained that the storm approaching is the impending doom of the dying years. The use of the word sepulture is interesting too, since this is referring to the small room or monument in which a person is buried. Typically, it is a Christian origin. To repair this, something like this could suggest Shilai wants a trap and contains all the power of nature inside a tomb for it to burst open in stanza 5. Sepulture is an isolating way of being buried, which could indicate Shilai wants to move away from all his miseries and be finally one of the nature. Stanza 5. O vapors from his solid atmosphere, black rain and fire and hail will burst, oh here. The speaker then described the wind as the bringer of death. He was already described it as a destroyer, but here he described it as one who brings black rain and fire and hail. Then, to end off this canto, the speaker appeals again to the wind, begging that it would hear him. Canto 3, stanza 1. Thou who didst waken from his summer dreams, the blue Mediterranean, where he lay, lulled by the cold of his crystalline streams. To begin this canto, the speaker described the wind as having awoken up the Mediterranean Sea from the whole summer of peaceful rest. The sea here is also personified. Stanza 2. Beside the Pumice Isle in Bass Bay, and so in sleep old palaces and towers, quivering within the waves and intense her day. With this stanza, the ode to the west wind. With this stanza, the speaker simply implies that the sea was dreaming of the old days, of palaces and towers, and that he was quivering at the memory of an intense day. Stanza 3. All overgrown with azure moss and flowers, so sweet, the sense of paints picturing them, thou for whose path the Atlantic's level powers. The speaker continues to describe the sea's dreams as being a slower day when everything was overgrown with bloom, moss, and flowers. Then he hints that something is about to change when he mentions the Atlantic's powers. Stanza 4. Cleave themselves into chasm while far below, the sea blooms and the oozy woods which wear the sapless foliage of the ocean know thy voice,
and suddenly grow grey with fear.
and tremble and despoil themselves. Oh, hear! This stanza is in reference to the sea's reaction to the power of wind. At the first sign of the strong wind, the sea seems cleave into chasm,
And grow grey with fear.
as they tremble to the power of the wind. Again, this stanza reflects a psalm in the worship of God Mighty, that nature itself tremble in its sight. Canto 4, stanza 1. If I were a dead leaf, thou mightest bear. If I were a swift cloud to ply with thee, a wave to pant beneath thy power and share. In this stanza, the speaker finally brings his attention to himself. He imagined that he was a dead leaf which the wind might carry away, or a cloud which the wind might blow. He thinks about
What it would be like to be a wave at the mercy of the power of the wind.
stanza 2. The impulse of thy strength only less free than thou, O uncontrollable, if even I were as in my boyhood and could be. The speaker stands in awe of the wondrous strength of the wind. It seems to act in impulse, and its strength is uncontrollable. He then mentions his childhood. Stanza 3. The comrade of thy wandering over heaven, then
When to outstrip,
thy sky speed,
scarce seemed a vision.
I will dear have striven. The speaker seems to be debating whether the wind was grown stronger since he was child or whether he was merely become weaker. He believes that he was on the verge of outstripping the wind when he was a child. Despite of this, his childhood seems like vision, so far away and so long ago. The speaker is obviously contrasting the wind's power with his own growing weakness as he grows older. Stanza 4. As thus with thee, in praying in my sore needs. Oh, lift me as a wave, a leaf, a cloud. I fall upon the thorns of life, I plead. In the light I fall upon the thorns of life, the speaker laments at the end of the poem. The speaker compares himself to a guy in prayer with his great need. He asks for the wind to blow him away, old and tired, just as the wind blew away the dead leaves of autumn. Stanza 5. A heavy weight of hour was chained and bowed, one to like thee, tameless and swift and proud. The speaker says that the weight of all of his life have bowed him down, even though he was once like wind, tameless, swift, and proud. Canto 5, stanza 1. Make me thy lyre, even as the forest is. What if my lips are polling like its own, the tumult of thy mighty harmonies? Again, the speaker begs to the wind, make him be at mercy. He wants to be like a lyre or harp played by winds. He wants to be like a dead leaves which fall to the ground when the wind blows. Stanza 2. We'll take from both a deep autumnal tone, sweet thought in sadness, be thou spirit fierce. My spirit, be thou me.
Impetuous one.
The speaker asks the wind to come into him and make him alive. This is yet another reference to the wind as the sort of God. In some religions, there is belief that to have new life, one must receive Holy Spirit. Stanza 3. Drives my dead thoughts over the universe, like withered leaves to quicken a new birth, and by incantation of this verse.
In here,
The speaker asks the wind to drive his dead thoughts over the universe. So, even as he dies, others might take his thoughts and his ideas and give them new birth. He thinks that it might even happen with every word he is speaking now. Stanza 4. Scatter as from an unextinguished heart, ashes and sparks, my words among mankind, be through my lips to awaken earth. The speaker asked the wind to scatter his thought as the ashes and sparks, that his word might kindle a fire among mankind and perhaps awaken the sleep earth. The trumpet of prophecy, O wind, if winter comes, can spring be far behind. The trumpet of prophecy is specifically referring to the end of the world as the Bible describes it. When the trumpet of prophecy is blown, Jesus Christ is believed to return to the earth to judge the inhabitants or us. The last two lines of Ode to the West Wind, the speaker reveals why he has begged the wind to take him away in death. He says, if winter comes, can spring far behind. With this, it reveals his hope that there is an afterlife for him. He desperately hopes that he might leave behind his dying body and enter into a new life after his death. The major themes of the poems is about morality, revolution, and the power of human mind and ideas. To summarize it all, Ode to the West Wind by Percy B. Shelley is focuses on the west wind, a powerful and destructive force, yet a necessary one. The autumnal west wind sweeps along the leaves and winged seeds. The seeds will remain dormant until spring. The wind is thus destroyer and preserver. The west wind also sweeps along storm clouds. It is the death song of the year. With the night that closes the year will come rain, lightning, and hail. There will be storms in Mediterranean and Atlantic. The poet pleads with the west wind to endow him with some of its powers, for he feels depressed and helpless. If he were possessed to the sum of the powers of the west wind, he would be inspired to write poetry which the world would read and by which it would be spiritually renewed, just as the renewal which spring succeeds to dormancy of winter. That's all. Thank you.